Some places take ice so seriously you'd think the glaciers hired lawyers. One wrong step, and suddenly you're violating a law that sounds like it was drafted by a paranoid penguin. And trust me, this is only the warm-up. 1. Watching a lakeside officer carry a laminated chart of permitted frozen behaviors feels like witnessing bureaucracy declare war on winter itself, especially in the town where stepping onto a frozen pond without wearing an officially approved reflective vest is a citable offense, as if the ice requires you to dress like a construction worker so the snow can see you coming. Residents reportedly treat it like a cross between a safety rule and a fashion critique, because nothing says seasonal joy quite like being told your vest isn't reflective enough for the ice to feel comfortable supporting you. The ordinance explains the requirement with the kind of poetic nonsense only municipal committees can write, claiming visibility allows rapid recovery in the event of sudden ice compromise, which is code for "we don't trust you to walk without falling into nature's trapdoor." The locals comply, begrudgingly, trudging around in neon yellow like rejected traffic cones while the pond cracks quietly under the weight of municipal optimism. 2. A single posted sign reading "No running on ice" would be reasonable if it weren't accompanied by a 27-page addendum describing the exact velocity at which slipping becomes a misdemeanor, complete with diagrams of hypothetical idiots demonstrating unacceptable enthusiasm. The town claims the rule prevents injuries, though it mostly prevents dignity by forcing grown adults into a cautious shuffle reminiscent of a penguin who just got laid off. Officials swear the speed calculation is scientific, derived from some forgotten physics student who once sketched momentum formulas on a napkin and accidentally created a law that still terrorizes the winter population. Residents joke that the only truly illegal speed is faster than fear, because if you look even slightly confident on the ice, a clipboard appears from the void to remind you that confidence leads directly to liability. It's winter athleticism, reimagined as a bureaucratic hostage situation, where even slipping is probably a documented infraction. 3. Watching a patrol officer measure the thickness of lake ice with what looks like a medieval spear would be bizarre enough. But the town that finds anyone who stands within 5 feet of unverified ice turns the entire season into a geographical minefield, because suddenly an innocent walk becomes a strategic operation, requiring you to guess which patches have been baptized by the official stick of safety. The justification cites preventative risk mitigation, which feels like a formal way of saying, "We don't trust your intuition, Todd," especially since enforcement officers reportedly treat the ice line like sacred ground, whispering warnings about danger zones that sound suspiciously like plot lines from low-budget action films. Locals claim the rule has turned every winter stroll into a bizarre dance where people leap backward at random, fearing a surprise fine more than actual hypothermia. It's the only place where nature freezes water and the government freezes joy. 4. Hearing a lifeguard blow a whistle at someone sitting too close to the frozen beach is the kind of surreal moment that truly signals winter has become spiritually unhinged, thanks to a regulation prohibiting loitering adjacent to ice surfaces, as though the lake might file a complaint about crowding if you linger too long within its frosty aura. The law's language is almost poetic in its paranoia, referencing psychological misinterpretation of ice stability by uninformed observers, which is bureaucratic shorthand for "someone once got too confident and ruined it for the rest of us." Locals have adopted an informal rule of leaving at least one dramatic body length between themselves and the shoreline, creating winter scenes that resemble socially distanced beach days without the warmth, purpose, or fun. The lake remains stoic, fully aware it has become the world's least approachable celebrity, admired from afar and feared for reasons that only City Hall understands. 5. A Canadian township known for over-engineering everything crafted a rule banning home-installed ice ramps, a restriction that only exists because one ambitious resident once decided that their driveway should double as a personal Olympic luge track, prompting lawmakers to fear that a neighborhood of amateur daredevils might soon start experimenting with gravity like bored Victorian children. The new ordinance, hilariously specific, defines an ice ramp as any intentional manipulation of frozen runoff that achieves undesired acceleration, which could describe virtually any driveway in February. Yet enforcement officers pretend they can distinguish between intentional stupidity and natural physics. To avoid fines, residents now chip away at their own driveways like sculptors desperate to erase the accusations of velocity. The rule has somehow positioned ice as both a criminal accomplice and an architect, creating a community where even slipping feels like confessing. 6. A Nordic village famous for its obsession with orderliness proudly enforces a ban on unlicensed ice drilling, a term that makes it sound like fishermen are applying for medical privileges to perform surgery on lakes. The permit process requires attending a seminar where instructors discuss proper auger etiquette with the seriousness usually reserved for heart surgeons and bomb technicians. The law was designed to reduce accidents, but the result is a winter landscape dotted with citizens wielding drills as if auditioning for a survival show, each one terrified that their hole might be classified as improperly executed under Section 4B. Enforcement officers carry rulers like disappointed woodworking teachers, measuring circular symmetry and noting any wobble with judgment so icy it competes with the lake itself. It's the kind of legal overreach that makes a simple fishing trip feel like an exam you didn't study for, but are somehow already failing. 7. A rural Alaska town implemented a rule forcing anyone who falls through the ice and survives to pay a fine for reckless interaction with unstable surfaces, as though plunging into freezing water wasn't punishment enough without receiving an invoice for your poor life choices. The local council claims the fine discourages risk-taking, but critics argue it mostly discourages staying alive long enough to pay it. The ordinance reads like it was drafted by an accountant with a personal vendetta against gravity, citing avoidable emergency response expenditure, while conveniently ignoring that ICE behaves like a part-time employee, dependable until it suddenly quits. Survivors reportedly emerge from rescue, shivering, stunned, and immediately greeted by paperwork, creating a surreal moment where the town treats hypothermia as a billable offense. It's the rare scenario where nature threatens your life and the government threatens your wallet, forming a perfect tag team of seasonal disappointment. 8. One Scandinavian resort town became so overwhelmed by tourists attempting dramatic ice photos that it passed a regulation banning performative poses within 20 feet of frozen lakes, essentially turning winter into a no-fun zone for influencers who believe frostbite is an aesthetic choice. The law specifies forbidden actions such as jumping, starfishing, and romantic dip gestures, implying that someone once tried to reenact a movie scene and needed rescuing before the third take. Authorities claim the rule prevents unnecessary emergency calls, though locals suspect it's really about preserving the dignity of the region by stopping outsiders from using nature as a seasonal photo booth. Enforcement officers politely inform offenders that their poses lack permits, a sentence that sounds like a parody until you remember governments love paperwork more than warmth. It's a town where beauty is abundant, but Instagram thirst is legally throttled. 9. A tiny New England community passed a bizarre law requiring anyone stepping onto a frozen lake to carry a self-extraction rope at all times, essentially turning every citizen into a reluctant mountain climber who just wants to walk their dog. The requirement arose after a string of minor accidents convinced the town council that preparedness could be enforced with ropes, clips, and enough paranoia to outfit a mid-budget adventure film. Residents now trudge across ice looking like they're training for an expedition into the afterlife, even if they're only retrieving a rogue hockey puck. Visitors often assume the town is hosting some kind of community-wide reenactment of Shackleton's voyage. But no, it's just Wednesday. It's winter safety rewritten by people who believe the best way to enjoy nature is to approach it like it's actively hunting you. 10. A lakeside region in Eastern Europe maintains a peculiar ban on winter enthusiasm near ice, a phrase so vague it effectively criminalizes joy, yelling, laughter, or any audible expression of optimism within earshot of a frozen surface. The rule exists because local officials claim loud noises weaken the confidence of the ice, a sentence that sounded metaphorical until they began explaining it with the earnestness of a novelist describing fragile emotions. Tourists regularly receive warnings for cheering during snowball fights or speaking too animatedly about soup, and those warnings come with the tone of someone reprimanding a toddler for upsetting an imaginary friend. Residents have adapted by adopting muted, monk-like serenity whenever they approach lakes, creating a winter atmosphere that feels less like a season and more like a mandatory meditation retreat. It's the world's only body of water with emotional support regulations. 11. A Japanese mountain district introduced a law requiring anyone skating on outdoor ice to wear a helmet certified for glacial impact, which sounds like the kind of headgear designed for warfare against frost giants, not Sunday recreation. The rule emerged after a local official watched too many disaster documentaries and became convinced that ice behaves like a vengeful deity waiting to crack open skulls at random. The helmets, bulky and reflective, transform skaters into a fleet of wandering disco balls that blind each other under the pale winter sun. Tourists often assume they're witnessing a futuristic cult engaged in ritualized slipping, but the locals insist it's just the price of not being fined. The irony is that the helmets make falling more dramatic, amplifying every wobble into a metallic echo that startles nearby wildlife and undermines the entire concept of subtlety. Winter sports, redesigned by fear. 12. A landlocked municipality with absolutely no history of ice-related incidents created a winter rule requiring annual ice safety refresher courses, even though the region's bodies of water freeze only once per decade, if the weather is feeling generous. The courses cover topics such as assessing ice density by vibe and emergency snowbank utilization, which sound like parody titles until you realize the town hired someone to teach them. Attendance is mandatory, leading residents to sit through PowerPoint slides detailing fantastical rescue scenarios that resemble rejected storyboards from a survival cartoon. Critics argue the law exists solely to justify the purchase of a very expensive laser pointer that the safety instructor wields like they're conducting an orchestra of confusion. It's winter preparation in a place where winter barely shows up, much like drafting tornado rules for a town whose strongest wind gusts come from teenagers slamming car doors. 13. A northern fishing village enforces a ban on ice lingerers, people who allegedly stand too long on frozen surfaces without a declared purpose, as though the ice needs to know your intentions before granting permission to exist atop it. The law was born after a group of contemplative seniors began holding informal chats mid-lake, prompting younger residents to panic and assume existential crises were causing safety issues. Officials responded with paperwork outlining acceptable time limits for various winter activities, turning relaxation into a timed event monitored by volunteers who carry clipboards like referees of seasonal procrastination. The village now treats ice walking as a kind of productivity exercise, where stopping to admire nature is borderline rebellious and lingering too long invites a stern lecture about efficiency. It's the only place where the ice feels less like nature and more like a passive-aggressive coworker monitoring your break time. 14. A remote Siberian outpost implemented a no sitting on the ice law after a series of photos circulated showing locals treating frozen rivers like outdoor living rooms, complete with folding chairs, portable radios, and snacks balanced on ice tables. The council feared this charming cultural quirk might escalate into full-fledged winter tailgating, so they outlawed the entire act as encouragement of static ice burden, a phrase that sounds like a philosopher complaining about emotional baggage. The ban triggered debates about how many kilograms of joy a river can withstand before cracking, a question scientists declined to answer because they have actual work to do. Today, residents perch awkwardly on nearby banks, staring longingly at the ice like exiles banished from their own seasonal tradition. The ice remains unbothered, silently judging the humans who somehow turned sitting into a legal concern. 15. A Minnesota township famous for its overzealous committees passed a regulation requiring anyone clearing snow from frozen lakes to file a temporary surface alteration notice, essentially turning the simple act of shoveling into an environmental intervention worthy of an action film briefing. The justification references geomorphological impact, which is bureaucratese for someone once made a really big snow maze and the council got scared. Residents now dutifully submit forms outlining their intended shovel paths, estimated snow displacement, and psychological readiness, as though winter recreation might trigger turf wars with angry snowdrifts. Enforcement officers occasionally perform spot inspections, a phrase that perfectly captures the absurdity of grown adults policing other grown adults for rearranging frozen water with a stick. The township continues to insist this promotes safety, but everyone knows the real risk lies in suffocating under the sheer weight of the paperwork. 16. Declaring a municipal ice emergency level 3 sounds dramatic, until you realize the town activates it whenever more than 4 people slip within a 24-hour window, transforming winter into a statistical hostage situation where the entire population must walk like malfunctioning robots to avoid triggering government overreaction. Once the threshold is hit, officials deploy barriers, flashing lights, and a siren that resembles a bored foghorn, all to warn residents that the ground is behaving exactly like frozen water behaves every single year. The The rule's wording suggests this is an unpredictable phenomenon, as though ice occasionally wakes up and chooses violence rather than simply existing in its natural, frictionless state. Locals have learned to move with exaggerated caution, not because they fear injury, but because they fear being the one extra fall that causes the mayor to shut down Main Street behind layers of yellow tape like it's a crime scene. 17. A lakeside resort famous for its pristine winter tranquility quietly enforces a ban on ice fishing after 4 p.m. because officials insist that fish become less predictable after sunset, a claim that raises the fascinating question of whether someone on the council once lost a philosophical argument to a trout. The rule forces anglers to pack up precisely when the fish finally decide to cooperate, turning the entire sport into a government-regulated exercise in disappointment. Tourists often assume the curfew exists for safety reasons, but no. The ordinance specifically warns against post-sunset fish agitation, as though the local perch transform into tiny aquatic insurgents after dark. To comply, residents obediently retreat from the ice at the world's least dramatic witching hour, casting suspicious glances at the water as if expecting it to erupt into chaos the moment the clock strikes 4. Winter logic at its finest. 18. A famous alpine town proudly advertises itself as the world capital of ice skating. Yet, it also maintains a law banning reverse skating on public rinks, citing unexpected emotional reactions from onlookers, which is a bureaucratic way of saying that backward movement apparently stresses out the locals. The ordinance claims reverse motion is a visual hazard, a phrase usually reserved for eclipses, explosions, and extremely questionable haircuts. Visitors attempting even a casual backward glide are met with whistle blasts so aggressive they could wake ancient glaciers, accompanied by a lecture outlining the dangers of confusing spectators who prefer their winter recreation linear. The result is a rink filled with people circling endlessly like lost parade floats, desperately resisting the urge to turn around lest they trigger a municipal meltdown. Skating backward isn't dangerous. It's just too avant-garde for a place that panics when someone shows creativity on ice. 19. A community famous for its obsession with environmental stewardship introduced a requirement that anyone clearing snow from frozen ponds must use biodegradable shovels, a concept that makes sense until you discover the shovels biodegrade in the middle of use, leaving people holding increasingly shorter handles while the blade dissolves like a soap bar at a summer camp. The ordinance was meant to reduce plastic waste, yet the practical effect is forcing residents to choose between shoveling quickly or watching their tools melt into philosophical metaphors about impermanence. Enforcement officers roam the frozen surfaces inspecting shovel fragments, writing citations for accelerated disintegration and non-ideal decomposition patterns. Locals now buy biodegradable shovels the same way they buy fireworks, expecting them to fail spectacularly. Nothing embodies environmental commitment quite like repeatedly purchasing equipment designed to betray you just as you start feeling productive. 20. One northern village insists that anyone walking across frozen rivers must do so in single-file formation, a rule originally created for school groups, but inexplicably extended to the entire population as though the river were grading everyone on teamwork. The regulation's official rationale claims this minimizes distributed stress variance, a phrase that sounds scientific until you notice it was likely invented by someone hoping residents would finally stop meandering like free-range penguins. Tourists often wander side by side and are immediately corrected by stern volunteers who treat winter like a perpetual fire drill. The resulting conga line of reluctant adults stretches across the ice every morning, creating the surreal impression that the town is permanently rehearsing for a parade that will never happen. The ice, meanwhile, remains structurally indifferent, quietly observing as humans demonstrate their evolutionary gift for overcomplicating a walk. 21. A coastal region known for treacherous winters enforces a surprising rule. No one is allowed to test ice thickness using household objects after a single winter when overly motivated residents stabbed frozen bays with broom handles, curtain rods, badminton rackets, and, in one case, an heirloom sword. The ordinance now requires everyone to use an approved measuring tool, which looks suspiciously like the same rod people were using before, except with a sticker that says, "Official." The council claims this prevents accidents, though the ban mostly prevents creativity, turning once improvised ice testing into a standardized ritual so rigid it could be mistaken for a winter-themed corporate workshop. Locals still mutter about the year someone's mop broke mid-test and ricocheted pieces across the lake, But today, the only approved method is the municipal rod, wielded with the solemnity of a knight tapping frozen armor. 22. A mountain valley famous for dramatic freeze-thaw cycles implemented an ordinance requiring anyone wearing ice cleats to also carry proof of spike maintenance, essentially turning winter footwear into a regulated asset. Officials insist this prevents property damage, though the rule mostly creates a bizarre scenario where residents must present documentation for their shoes like proud yet exhausted parents at a school conference. Enforcement officers perform cleat inspections, checking for rust, dullness, and irresponsible spike wear. This transforms something as mundane as walking into a lightly supervised engineering project. Locals now treat their footwear like vintage cars, polishing and tuning them before stepping outside lest their cleats be deemed negligently unsharp. Winter already demands balance, warmth, and endurance. This town added paperwork just to ensure no one forgets the thrilling privilege of owning functional spikes. 23. A Scandinavian capital enforces a law banning the use of drones over frozen lakes due to ice anxiety, a phrase coined by officials who insist the sight of flying machines causes visitors to panic about the stability of the surface below. The ordinance claims drones trigger visual misinterpretation of load distribution, which is an elaborate way of saying people get confused when shadows move too quickly. Pilots who break the rule aren't fined immediately. Instead, their drones are grounded and placed in a holding locker that resembles an evidence shelf for misbehaving toys. Residents attending winter festivals now enjoy unbroken serenity, free from aerial intrusions, but full of signs reminding everyone that ice experiences stress when filmed from above. Somehow, the lakes feel safer without drones, not because they actually are, but because the government has officially declared ignorance a valid safety strategy. 24. An otherwise quiet Lakeshore County introduced a ban on competitive sliding, defined as any attempt to slide farther than another person on a frozen surface, after an unusually ambitious group of adults transformed the town pier into an unofficial ice Olympics. The resulting ordinance reads like a stern lecture from a disappointed gym teacher, forbidding distance contests, speed attempts, and performance-based gliding. Officials claim the ban reduces injuries, though it primarily reduces joy, turning spontaneous winter fun into a regulated act with the emotional tone of a tax seminar. Locals now slide only in small, apologetic increments, closely monitored by volunteers armed with clipboards as if the trajectory of human bodies requires municipal oversight. The ice, once a canvas for playful competition, has been downgraded to a platform for legally compliant shuffling. 25. A famously cautious tourist town enacted a rule requiring children to wear color-coded badges while playing near frozen ponds, each badge indicating their approved radius of exploration, a classification system that makes childhood winter play resemble a government-managed wildlife program. Officials swear this promotes safety, but the effect is transforming parks into controlled environments where kids sprint joyfully until a badge monitor gestures frantically like an air traffic controller guiding runaway airplanes. Parents appreciate the order, though many admit the badges have become strange status symbols, with children comparing who has permission to venture closest to the ice like they're discussing promotions in a tiny corporate hierarchy. Meanwhile, the frozen ponds remain entirely unfazed by the badge system, cracking and shifting with total disregard for color-coded human systems. 26. A rural municipality with a history of ice-related mischief instituted a law banning the creation of ice sculptures exceeding emotional capacity, a phrase whose meaning is so ambiguous it practically begs for philosophical interpretation. Officials claim the wording prevents people from carving dangerously large or complex figures, but locals quickly discovered that emotional capacity is defined based on whether the sculpture appears unsettling to inspectors. This means a harmless snow dragon might pass one day and be condemned the next for projecting excessive intimidation. Artists now find themselves negotiating with the bureaucracy over facial expressions and body language carved into frozen water. Winter creativity has effectively been placed on a leash, and the leash is held by someone who gets nervous around sharp cheekbones. 27. A lakeshore promenade introduced a ban on placing personal items directly on the ice after a series of incidents in which joggers left water bottles, hats, and entire gym bags frozen into the surface, creating what officials described as temporary archaeological sites of questionable value. The ordinance frames personal belongings as foreign inclusions that compromise ice aesthetics, a phrase that neatly captures the town's eternal fear of clutter. Now, anyone who so much as sets down a thermos is chased off the lake with the kind of urgency usually reserved for wildlife control. The rule has turned winter into a game of keep-away, with residents clutching their possessions as if the ice were a kleptomaniac with excellent taste. 28. A high-elevation community famous for its avalanche warnings introduced a law requiring all ice walkers to verbally announce themselves every 30 seconds, supposedly to reassure nearby skiers and hikers that no phantom cracking sounds indicate imminent danger. The result is a winter landscape filled with people calling out, "Still here," and "Not falling," like overly cheerful ghosts. Officials insist this auditory roll call reduces panic, though it mostly reduces dignity by forcing everyone to narrate their own survival in real time. The ice remains unchanged, but the atmosphere feels like a musical, performed by people who can't sing but must deliver their lines to avoid citations. Winter has become a stage, and the script is painfully repetitive. 29. A northern European city popular with tourists added a rule banning romantic gestures on ice, after multiple proposals ended with celebratory jumps that the ice did not appreciate. The ordinance now forbids kneeling, ring presentations, arm lifting, and any action described as emotionally demonstrative, transforming frozen lakes into sterile emotional no-fly zones. Couples must take their affection back onto solid ground, where the city has designated special proposal plazas conveniently free of both romance and ambiance. Critics argue it's an overreach. Officials argue that nothing ruins a proposal like sinking. The ice remains the silent third partner in every relationship, admired, respected, and absolutely off-limits for meaningful moments. 30. A famously rule-obsessed region implemented a winter night curfew specifically for ice activities, banning all frozen surface recreation after 9 p.m., because officials believe nighttime encourages unpredictable decision-making. A statement which suggests the entire population transforms into badly written sitcom characters the moment the sun sets. Enforcement officers patrol lakes with flashlights like camp counselors, searching for runaway teenagers, gently reminding late-night skaters that fun is time-sensitive and legally restricted. The curfew has turned winter evenings into a forced intermission, with residents reluctantly abandoning the ice like actors leaving the stage mid-performance. Strangely, the policy hasn't reduced accidents, but it has created a thriving black market of underground moonlight skating sessions whispered about with the seriousness of forbidden rituals. 31. A famously cold northern province passed a law requiring anyone venturing onto deep wilderness ice to carry a laminated self-assessment of awareness, a form that asks users to rate their knowledge of ice conditions, their preparedness, their emotional state, and whether they have adequately contemplated risk. The idea was to encourage mindfulness, but it mostly encourages people to stand on frozen rivers while filling out bureaucratic personality quizzes. Rangers routinely find abandoned checklists drifting across the snow like existential homework. The ice, of course, cares nothing for human introspection, cracking boldly through every box they checked with confidence. Winter, once a simple matter of cold feet and common sense, has become a documented psychological journey overseen by government officials trying to quantify the human capacity for questionable decisions. If these ice laws didn't crack your sanity, congratulations. You're tougher than the regulations. Drop your pick for the dumbest one below and stick around. The madness only gets colder.